Hello, everyone. I'm Camille. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I think it's really important to talk about mental health, especially given the state of things that are happening now globally. And I hope at the end of this, you find some sort of resource that you can connect with in making your mental health journey even better. So I'm going to pull up a bit of a PowerPoint now. So bear with me for one moment. Has that worked?
Yes, it has.
Amazing. Okay. Just before I start, I do want to give a bit of a content warning. Some of the things we are going to talk about might be a little bit difficult. So if you need space or time, please feel free to take them. I will not be upset in the slightest. I want this to be a safe space of learning for everyone here. And the only way I can do that is if I, let you know that things can happen. And if you feel uncomfortable, please do whatever it takes for you to feel better. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Thank you. Okay. So I believe this has all been covered. The Slido event code is 24366, just to let everyone know. That's where the anonymous questions are being held. And at any point in time, if you would like to ask a question, I am open for it. I don't mind at all. And I also want to remind you that for me specifically, there's no such thing as a dumb question. I work with 8-year-olds sometimes, so. But I just wanted to start off with a little bit about myself, why I'm here, what I'm doing. My name's Camille. I use she, her pronouns. I'm originally born and raised in California, USA, but I've been living in New York for about 6 years now. I went to NYU and I graduated in 2019 with a bachelor's in psychology and chemistry. I currently work at the Hetrick-Martin Institute as the Health and Wellness Education Specialist. What that means is I do things like this all of the time, from webinars to in-person classes about any facet of health. I've been teaching mental health and sexual health education workshops now for 6 years, in person throughout New York City and online all over the world. This is the first one I got to do in New Zealand, so that's very fun. But I strive to help people improve their overall mental health with techniques to make them stay mentally happy. Because I think that given our time right now, everything that's happening, a lot gets put on our plate, and often our mental health is something that is being dropped off to the side. And that's really important to stay strong with your mental health and to keep focusing and working towards it, because in a sense, it is part of your overall health. So if you're not mentally healthy, other parts of your health can also deteriorate. So let's just go over a quick overview of some of the things that I'll be talking about. The start of the school year, or in this case, the school year in general, can be a very exciting time, but also a very stressful time for students. Stress can be manifested by coursework, new experiences, familial relationships, culture, social pressures, financial situations. Long-term stress or short bouts of overwhelming stress can and will affect a student's physical health, but more often their mental health, and can be the source of anxiety or clinical depression. As young people spend time on campus with their peers, promoting positive coping strategies to maintain good mental health becomes the primary priority. We need these things not just as another, tool in our toolkit, but we need these things to stay alive. If you're not mentally healthy, your physical health starts to deteriorate. Your social health starts to deteriorate, right? It's all one big connected circle. More specifically, in New Zealand, about 1 in 4 adults will face a mental health issue during their lifetimes. Students in universities are more vulnerable to experiencing poor mental health due to the stressful conditions they constantly face. The cost of mental health in different places around the world deeply impacts how students are going to be able to access them. This aims to explain what mental health is, to identify and explain contributing factors, and what poor mental health is versus being mentally healthy. I use these terms because a lot of the times people will say, well, I'm stressed. Well, I think I'm anxious, but I don't have anxiety. I've never been to a doctor. I've never been given this diagnosis. Or I think I'm depressed. I don't know. It's hard for me to do things, but I don't have a diagnosis. And I just want to remind everyone that mental health actually is on a scale. So it's not a binary concept. It's not like I have good mental health or I have bad mental health. It's a dynamic health issue that changes day to day. So I just kind of wanted to take a second to step back and just sort of define what I'm talking about. Mental health here is defined as a state of well-being in which individuals realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Now that's a lot, right? We already have so much on our plates going to school, trying to figure out how to produce things fruitfully or have a greater contribution to our community may seem really overwhelming. But there are simpler steps we can take to achieve those goals. So much like a traffic light, mental health resides on a spectrum. Good mental health is a sense of well-being, confidence, and self-esteem. It enables people to fully enjoy and appreciate other people day to day in life, in our environment, in whatever we choose to enjoy. The term mental illness is an umbrella term that categorizes very many different illnesses that are more specific and have a specific set of symptoms. So if someone says, I have poor mental health, they're not disclosing anything other than the fact that their mental health is not at the top of where it could be right now. So I put this analogy up here because just like a traffic light, we need to be aware of how our emotions, interactions, how all of it influences our behavior. When we're in traffic, the red light is clearly telling us that if we were to continue to drive, we're putting ourselves and other people at considerable risk. Our bodies are only able to manage a finite amount of stress before we are in crisis. Like a traffic light, this uses colors to reflect how socially, environmentally, physically things demand, and may result in a person not being able to cope and result in a crisis that can have potential adverse events, such as suicide, non-suicidal self-harm, harming others, and alternatively, learning coping strategies and having ways to manage the demands of life and study gives us the opportunity to reflect on what works for us to help reinforce positive actions and behaviors. Now, this may seem like an easy thing to do, right? I'm in crisis, it's red, my traffic light is red, things are really bad, oh no, oh no. But it takes a lot of work. Mental health, like finding a balance between your mental health, takes as much work and practice as any assignment you're given in class, any project that you're doing. It's not just gonna happen overnight. You have to become aware of what's happening in both your physical and mental bodies and be able to, sort of put them in different categories based on how bad things are, right? So if I were to say, oh, I failed a test today, it went really bad, I'm upset, but I don't think that my life is in crisis. So as you see where I'm going with this, there are different levels to how badly mental health can progress. Just one of the last things that I wanted to say is that the physical, the mental, and the social impacts of mental health are super interrelated. I will get to that a little bit more in the next one. So mental health includes social, emotional, and psychological well-being, and is not just the absence of illness, but also the ability to maintain relationships, cope with stress, contribute to the community, and enjoy life. Keeping mentally healthy is just as important as staying physically healthy. And when I say mentally healthy, I think that spending time with friends, the social component of this is actually really healthy. I know from personal experience of going to university that sometimes that's very difficult. You get bombarded with assignment after assignment, term paper after term paper, and you kind of close up in a little bubble. It gets difficult. Your mental health starts to deteriorate. You haven't slept in days. You're working so hard because you want this position, you want this job, you want this degree. But taking a little step back, having a moment of selfishness for yourself will actually help you become more healthy, like along the road. And I'm not saying like go out and spend $6,000 or, never show up to class again. No, I'm saying take a moment for yourself, reflect on it. And I think by things that I've done in the past, it will start to build and it will start to help you feel better mentally. We're going to go into more concrete examples of this in a little while, but I just kind of wanted to give everyone the gist of the.
Can I just interrupt with a few questions from the audience?
Okay.
There's an anonymous question that is asking you, how did you personally cope with COVID in COVID Central, New York City?
Yeah, so I tried my best to cope. As many of you are probably aware, it was the hot spot for a while, and I had been in New York City since the pandemic started. And the first 3 months were actually really scary. I lived really close to a hospital, and I often saw the ice truck body carriers that were there because hospitals were just overfilled with patients. Patients were dying. There were nowhere to put them. And, being here on your own is already scary enough, but to have a worldwide pandemic thrust upon you in the midst of this is even harder. And I think one thing that really was not well for us was our, one thing that I believe in these I statements that was not beneficial to us was our current lack of leadership or leadership that we currently have made things worse. And it's very, very difficult to have to maintain this quarantined pandemic situation around you when you already have issues that are going on inside, or you already have issues in school, it's just piling up and piling up and piling up. And I think that the best thing for me was that I have a really healthy support system. I have friends that I can call to. I have, games that I can play. I have TV shows that I like to watch. For me, staying busy is actually really helpful to not just like spiral downwards.
Can I just ask you, I got some more questions here, but if you are on Slido, please feel free to, you can be anonymous or you can be identified, but please do so that we can pose some questions through the session. Thanks, Camille. You can go to the next slide.
Okay, perfect. So I want to talk about briefly some of the factors that cause poor mental health. I've labeled a few here, but there are many that I can't cover in just an hour's length of time. It's interesting because mental health is really one of the only studies that is based primarily on the human brain and human emotion and human interaction of people, right? When you get a hypothesis for any other science, it's always we're using things that can be easily controlled and easily manipulated. That's not so the case when it comes to people. Every single person is different, so you can't really have a control group and you can't really have, an experimental group. So we like to highlight things in a more broad sense, right? So the 4 things I have here are social, environmental, biological, and interpersonal. And what that means is these are the big 4 things that can impact someone's mental health. Social being example number 1. As time has gone on, social media has consumed many of our lives. I can attest to this. I'm stuck on those darn apps almost all the time. And it can become really overwhelming to see constant news and constant, updates and constant photographs of things that you wouldn't be reminded of had you not joined this social media platform. But you can also find a sense of community on those platforms. You can find friends, you can find forums that you love to engage in, so it is, with all of these, there are pros and cons. But I just want to mention, while I'm mentioning things that cause poor mental health, that there is something that can help you cause greater mental health. Another thing is the environment. This is more speaking on where you're from versus how you live. People who have higher incomes can spend more money on mental health resources. People with lower incomes don't have that luxury. And not being able to see someone for your mental health as you would a doctor if you had a broken leg can have consequences later in life. Another thing that I want to speak about briefly is that sometimes it is biological, sometimes it is genetic. If a parent has, some type of mental illness, poor mental health, it can get passed on to a child. And I think that's something that we're learning more about now because of the way that the younger generation is more open to talking about their mental health versus the generations before them. And the last but key piece is interpersonal. I know a lot of us are stuck with our thoughts all of the time. No matter how much you want to turn it off, you can't. But there are ways to frame your thoughts into making your mental health better. I will get to that in a few more slides. Are there any new questions?
Well, there's another question here, which is really interesting.
Okay.
Do you feel like universities should be doing more to look out for students' mental health during this pandemic? And if so, what could they be doing?
Yes, I absolutely believe so. When I was in college, I helped found a way to get counselors that were available at my school to do text-based services. So what you would do, instead of going into an appointment, you could text a therapist at any time of the day, and they would be willing to walk you through a procedure that could help best benefit you in that point in time. And I think that's definitely something to look forward to in more campuses. I also think that one of the main reasons that people don't seek out mental health services is because there's still such a large stigma surrounding it, right? We have these ideas that, oh, if you cry, you're weak, or oh, if you're angry, you just have an anger problem, or, if you're spending tons of money, you're just irresponsible. But no, a lot of these things that I've just named are actually symptoms of mental health illnesses. But if you don't know that, because the language and the ideas of mental health is so stigmatized, it really hinders the ability to which you can get help.
So there's a follow-up question. Does one's ethnicity have a significance in one's ability to deal or cope with mental health issues?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. There are a bunch of studies that are going around the world today. I know there's one big one in Australia. There are also some in America right now on Black populations, where we're trying to see how race and ethnicity plays into mental health, because obviously nothing that happens in the world happens in a vacuum. And so if event A happens over here, can still impact so many people, but just in different ways. And being a part of a community experiencing event A can also have that same sort of response, just to a more intense direction, because you're not only bonded with your community, but you also experienced the thing that caused a response. Does that make sense?
Yep. Cool.
Cool. Okay.
We've got some more questions, but we'll come to them later.
All right. So there is an important connection between mental health and physical health. The connection between mental health and physical health goes both ways. This means people with poor mental health are more likely to get physical illnesses, including chronic physical conditions. Likewise, people with chronic physical conditions are more likely to get mental health problems. So it's like a seesaw effect, kind of. And I'm not saying this in the sense that like, oh, now everyone today should run a 5K and you'll feel happier. No. That's completely not what I'm saying. I'm saying that taking these small steps physically can help make you feel better mentally. You know, if you are taking a bus somewhere that's not that far of a walk, why not take the walk? Maybe climb up some stairs instead of an elevator. It's simple things like that that can get your hormones and your things in your brain more excited and more likely to be reuptaken. And that will definitely help with your mental health. I know a lot of people in New York City cite running as one of their main ways of maintaining mental health, like a self-care day as they go for a nice little run. I've never been a runner and I will never be a runner. But if you are, like, that's wonderful. That's one thing that you can do, one like tangible thing that you can do to see if it helps improve your mental health status. But on the other hand, you know, people who have chronic conditions are also more likely to get mental health illnesses or poor mental health because of the stigmas that are put around them. So a lot of people with chronic illness are often seen as like not really having that illness, especially when it's an invisible disease, and constantly being told by doctors, by people around you that, you know, this is fake, this is not true. It really impacts your brain, and your brain begins to think those things. And then the thoughts of your brain are so corroded that they begin to deteriorate. So it's like a double-edged sword in that sense, that it is all working together. It's very hard to treat just one aspect of health. You can't just treat physical health without taking into consideration mental health. And you can't just treat mental health without taking into consideration physical health. I'm gonna take a sip of water real quick. So I know a lot of young people have questions surrounding mental health, and I haven't really gone into like, you know, here's a list of all of the mental illnesses that people get in college or are found in college, stuff like that, because that's not what I want the takeaway from this to be. I want the takeaway from this to be, how can I improve my general mental health? And if it comes to like, yeah, I'm going to go to therapy, like that's fantastic. Or, hey, I'm going to spend more time with my friends and family. That's fantastic. It's hard enough to move into this new chapter of your life, university, and then have all of these other things that you have to deal with. So while university is essential in moving up in the workplace as a professional, it's also associated with risks of health and well-being. There are many factors that can have these risks, which include but aren't limited to international students, students from rural areas, Aboriginal, Native, Indigenous students, and students with disabilities. Because a lot of people who I personally went to college with lived in the town or lived in an area that they could easily go to the college and then go back home on the weekends. I, however, had a different approach to college where I flew halfway on around the continent to get to my college. I just ended up staying there. But I didn't have this thing where I could just easily go be with my family, be with my friends, be with my, whoever I left behind there. It was something that caused a lot of emotions in me, and I know it does for other people as well. Now, I have 3 other things up here: students in rural areas, Aboriginal, Native students, and Indigenous students, and students with disabilities, because a lot of the time the stigma with them often overrides their chances into getting into colleges. There have been many studies on this, just because the lack of access to resources that other students are getting. Students with disabilities often have to go to classes for students with disabilities, but not every disability is the same. So it's hard to sort of understand these different risks that can make your mental health worse, because a lot of the time they're not well studied. And that's not great, but we're working towards something that can help make everyone feel better about themselves, regardless of the studying or the non-studying or whatever it is. I'm gonna just move this over real quick.
Here that I think is timely. Do you have any techniques to specifically address the pressures that university students face as opposed to the general population?
Yes. My first advice would be to find a mentor at your school. It's hard. I do not like talking to very many people. So for me, finding a mentor was really hard, but I think if you find someone that you like and you just ask them the questions that you're too scared to ask anyone else, and you build this sort of repertoire with them, I think it'll make your university life a lot easier. I was lucky enough to have 2 professors who were willing to do that for me. And I found that I learned more from them outside of class than I did in the class, because they were willing to do extra research with me, pull me aside to extra conferences, stuff like that, just because I showed initiative. And I know that's not in everyone's wheelhouse. I know a lot of introverts who have absolutely no way that they're going to do that. So if a mentor is maybe too far outside of your comfort zone, perhaps trying to get a study group together, just having these, tangible sources of friendship, of mentorship can really help you, because as you begin to bond in these sorts of things, it feels like a sense of joy, of happiness, and just it'll help your mental health. I do have one caveat to that. If you have anyone near you who you live with or are friends with who aren't exactly the kindest people and perhaps a bit toxic, one thing we can do to distance ourselves from them is to maybe stop showing up for them as much, don't answer their phone calls or their texts, things like that. And that will drastically improve your mental health, just taking a step away from a relationship that might not serve you well.
People in New Zealand. There's no such thing. Free enough, eh? Sorry, as you wish. Carry on.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so another thing I wanted to mention were the cultural factors behind mental health issues. Across cultures, there are differences in the meaning and the degree of severity of a disease, as well as mental illness. I know people from America whose parents started taking them to therapy at 12 because they expressed that they had poor mental health. I also know people who are in their mid to late 20s who've never seen a therapist, never gone to a doctor about it because they don't believe in mental health. And so the culture that you grow up in really establishes your thoughts and your beliefs and your patterns of belief. So different cultures may also have different views on whether mental illness is real or only imagined. The culture of a society determines how people decide how they're going to cope with mental illness, whether they seek treatment, and how much support people have from their friends and families. So I keep going on about having these social systems, but I know that not everyone is lucky enough to have that, right? Maybe their friends just don't believe you. Maybe your parents don't understand mental health. Maybe a teacher thinks that, you know, you're doing this out of dramatics. It happens a lot. And I think it's really important to seek out the type of people who are willing to be there for you. And that in itself is quite a task. You will find that maybe some of your friends aren't the best friends for you in this current time. And that's okay. You know, you invite them to drinks one day and then you find another set of friends and you play some board games with them or you study with them, you know. It's all about balance, and it's all about finding a balance for yourself and not subscribing to these internalized ideas that have been ingrained in you. So a lot of, you know, getting better with mental health is actually unlearning the things that you learned about mental health from other people. Okay, so this is a big one that comes up more recently now. This idea of imposter syndrome. Can I have a raise of hands of anyone who's ever heard this phrase before? Yeah. So imposter syndrome is a psychological phenomenon in which people are unable to internalize their accomplishments. That is some dictionary straight text. I want to talk about it in a more conversational way. Imposter syndrome is having this feeling that you are not good enough and you will never be good enough at what you do, which is wild because all of you are here in this room for a reason. You chose to come here and you chose to listen to this webinar, yet I saw most people's hands go up. And to be completely honest, my hand would have gone up as well. I often have days where I don't think I'm good enough for what I'm doing. Like, how did I get here? Where am I supposed to go? It's very tough. And one way that I want to sort of speak about this is by an exercise. I'd like to offer this to you. You don't have to do it. It is kind of silly, but it's a way in which your brain basically is conditioned into thinking good thoughts about yourself. Is anyone familiar with the Pavlovian dogs experiment? Okay, basically Pavlov rung a bell, gave a dog some food, the dog salivated. Took the food away, rung a bell, the dog salivated. Not exactly in the same way, but if you look at yourself in the mirror and say nice things to yourself, your brain will associate those feelings of self-worth more strongly than those feelings of self-depreciation. But consistency is the key, right? We don't do an experiment once and then consider it fact. It has to be able to be repeated. It has to be able to pass certain, like, all of the statistics people here know that. I don't. I went to school for psychology. But it has to be able to be repeated. And so I have a little assignment for everyone here today. If at any point in the day you could just Go home and say 3 nice things about yourself in a mirror, but say it like you mean it. And it's gonna feel silly, and it's gonna feel like, what am I doing? What am I doing in this mirror? I have better things to do. But just try it. Try it for a day. Try it for a couple of days. I do think that in the long run, it will help your brain sort of recontextualize the things that it's been taught, and will help you unlearn some of these bad things that are weighing you down, are making you feel like an imposter, even though you're in a place that many people would love to be at. I have a little mantra here. You can say in the mirror, or you can just look in the mirror and say, you're great, you're wonderful. Another thing nice about yourself. But the point of this is, like I said before, improving your mental health takes practice, and it takes time, and it is work. It's not something that's just going to be better overnight. As much as I want there to be a pill I take, I feel better every day, unfortunately, that's not how it works. It's a lot of introspective work that you have to do, and that you have to be willing to do to actually start seeing a change. Are there any follow-up questions?
Camille, it's about New Zealand now. It is often said that New Zealand has a systemic problem with poor support for mental health, especially for minorities. How can we help fix this? Is there any ideas from stateside?
This is a bit of a tough one. I don't know if you follow American politics, but they're currently on their way of cutting everything good and funding everything bad. But I think in these situations, it's important to, oh, this is going to be so corny, but be the change you wish to see, right? If you are unable to get help for your mental health due to whatever reason, maybe start looking up some grants. If you find people who you know are in crisis situations, who cannot take care of themselves, try to be there for them. Try to find, you know, a GoFundMe for them. Try to be there for them in any way that you can that doesn't make your own mental health worse. Because it really does take a village to help people, especially in this way. And I know here, especially, things are getting cut surrounding mental health funding. And so we're trying more creative ways about it. At my personal work, we have free therapists for youth to come and see. We have text-based hotlines that you can use if you're in a place of crisis. We have like video calls with groups that are willing to talk about similar issues than you. It takes stuff like that. And I think once one group finds that it works, 2 groups might now become planned, and those might work. And it does take a long process. I wish I had an easier and more concrete answer to you, because I would love to fix that problem on my own, but it's just not something that I can do by myself, and neither can anyone else. It takes a team.
Thank you for that. Next.
So this is sort of where the content warnings get a little bit more intense. We're going to be talking about suicide and self-harm. I want to point out that the rate of suicide is much higher in New Zealand than it is internationally and amongst other places nearby. And
with regards to that, from a foreign optic, what do you think might be contributing to that, and what can we do here to make sure that doesn't perpetuate?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we learn in like community healthcare planning is to have teams ready to face adversity. And when I say teams, I mean people of specific cultures, people of specific, you know, genders, things like that, people who will really be able to connect with people in a way that helps them become better, and then helps that person find someone else that they can help become better, right? In America, we do a lot of like, POC specific groups about suicide, self-harm, stuff like that. We do a lot of Latinx groups, stuff like that. And I think breaking it down into a smaller circle where you're more comfortable, whether it be in your ethnicity, your sexuality, your race, your age, I think finding that community and being able to do small groups together is really helpful, because it's not just one person talking for an hour. It's a group discussion. Everyone gets to come in, everyone gets to, you know, say their piece. And oftentimes you'll find that someone is struggling the same way you are, and you can come up with ideas together. It does, like I've said before, take a village to help a lot of these things.
Well, thanks for that. You can continue, thanks.
So I wanted to highlight this page because in relation to the last page, because a lot of people think that there are few to no warning signs of suicide or self-harm in that matter. But if you've ever seen someone make jokes about suicide, right? You don't necessarily think, oh, I need to be worried about them. It's things like giving possessions away, constantly feeling hopeless, having a negative self-view, frequently talking about death. It's being irritable over very small things, feeling isolated, feeling like a burden to others. And I am lucky enough to be able to have a group of kids that I'm able to watch and, you know, journal their day-to-day, mood-to-mood sort of situations. But I mean, no one's taking notes on our friends, right? And I'm not saying that it's anyone's specific job to make sure everyone is okay, but sometimes a text to a friend that you haven't heard from in a long time can really mean a lot, especially if they're feeling bad, especially if they're in a depression, you know, especially if you've been seeing some strange behavior. Just a quick, hey, thought about you, you know, how are you doing? And a lot of times, if you're close enough to that person, they're willing to share, you know. And I think that communication is really the key thing that can help people stop, you know, hurting themselves or hurting other people. And I'm not saying that's like the only thing that's going to prevent anything, but if people have like the present suicidal ideation, presence of suicidal thoughts, I think having a conversation with them, if they're willing, can be really helpful. Just hearing a peer talk to them about it in a non-judgmental way, like, is really helpful for someone to hear, like fact versus their own opinion. I've also said these two other things on the left side of the slide, protective factors and safety planning. What protective factors are questions that you can ask someone who, you know, is not really dealing with their crisis well, to help find them a plan in case anything does happen. I'm not saying a plan of like, okay, I'm gonna stay with you 24/7 and make sure you're okay. Just an easy plan, like, okay, they don't text back much. Hey, do you think you could just text me once a day, say you're okay? Or, hi, like if you're feeling at a point of crisis, I will take you to the doctor. Or, hey, you know, let's get a therapist maybe together. We both see them. If we have the money, we can do that. And we can try to figure this out together. So it's not so isolating from them, because a lot of the times with suicide, one of the main attributes or one of the main symptoms, I guess, is isolation, feeling alone, feeling like a burden. And it often comes from an intense state of depression. It can come from other things, but usually it comes from this buildup, and a single triggering event is what makes it happen. So I'm going to go to the next slide here and see if I can better explain what I was saying. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to just do this real quick. So the
Yeah,
AB,
this question following that is
yes.
interesting. It's been upvoted by a few people. Root cause of my personal issue is my sexuality. I cannot continue to live this life anymore. Any suggestions that you think might help me now?
Yeah, so there are a lot of online chat-based spaces for people, not places like Reddit. I'm not talking about Reddit, but there are LGBTQ online spaces that might help you. It's usually a bunch of people and they divide them up into age ranges for them just to talk to one another. I hold one every Saturday that anyone is welcome to come to. And they just talk about how they're feeling. And a lot of the times it's what they're scared of, you know, because coming out a lot of the times is really scary. And for the people who had it really easy, like, you can't just look at them as that is the one way that it is done, you know? A lot of different stories happen, and I would suggest trying to find someone you can confide in, whether it's someone you met off the internet or someone who's been a 12-year friend, or maybe a professor that you really like, or your cool uncle, someone that you can trust in and know that they won't do anything to further harm you or to disclose any information about you. But if you are having really intense feelings of distress, I'm not a doctor, but I would consider maybe if you have any way to see a therapist. I believe they're very helpful. I have a therapist. I found out my therapist has a therapist. It's very helpful just to talk to someone who has, you know, very little to say about your life, but can they be there to listen. And I think that's really important, is just having those listeners.
Thank you. That was very useful. Thank you.
Okay, so the ABC model. The ABC model is fundamental to emotive behavior therapy. This was a model that was developed for emotions and behaviors, which represents the basis of numerous cognitive therapies. The goal of this is to change irrational beliefs into ones that are more rational. Through this, a person is required to identify their irrational beliefs. Example, I have to be perfect, or I have to be really popular, and then question those false beliefs through reality tests. So it seems really confusing, but I think this will make it a little clearer. So A is an activating event, right? It's a triggering event. Someone says, hey, you failed that test really bad. You did really bad. If you already have negative feelings about yourself, the beliefs that you have are, oh my God, I'm not a good student. I failed that test. I might fail the next test because I'm not a great student, and everything spirals and spirals and spirals. And the consequences of this is maybe you study extra hard and you still don't get the marks that you want, right? This can happen to anyone. So those are the A, B, and C parts about this. But let's really focus on the D and the E. So yes, you failed your test. You think you're not good at whatever it is the test was on. And yes, your grade went down. Okay, now we have to change that belief system, right? I'm not good enough. I need to be perfect. What if you failed a test, and instead of going to the worst possible scenario, you just say, hey, that was a bad test. I didn't study as well as I could have, or I didn't get enough sleep, or, you know, my stomach hurt the whole time, right? And the consequences of that are, yeah, I'm still gonna have a bad grade, but in the next test, I'm gonna try to do better, because I'm not gonna let this one event spiral all the way down like my semester or my college year or whatever. And by doing this, you're reintegrating better belief systems into your mind, because now the next time this happens, your brain's not immediately going to go, oh no, this is the worst possible scenario. I'm going to get kicked out of college. I'm the worst. I need to be perfect. It's just going to go, hey, sometimes it's hard to do your best at everything. You did try to do your best, and that's all I'm going to ask for. But this time I'm going to study longer, a little harder. I'm going to get some more sleep. Maybe I won't play a video game tonight, and then I'll play all day tomorrow. Just by relearning these ways of thinking can really change the way that you feel and change the way that you emote in certain situations, so that the consequences of these situations are never going to be as bad, because you don't fall to this like black and white sense of thinking, right? You're not always just, oh, I did something terrible, it sucked, and now everything is bad. It was a one-time thing. I'm going to get over this. Let's try again tomorrow. And that is so much easier said than done. But it is something, like I've said before, takes practice, it takes time, and you have to be willing to do it.
There's a question here.
Okay.
What is and it's been upvoted by a few people, what is the correlation between, oh, it's been upvoted again, I've lost it. What's the correlation between mental health and economic health?
Oh, very big. That's a great question. I think a lot of mental health issues and illnesses have more in-depth symptoms about economical health, financial health. But that being said, right, if you are in a state of poor mental health, that clouds your decision-making capabilities. When it comes to money, when it comes to investing, when it comes to, you know, careers, stuff like that. If you're in a bad place mentally, that affects how you're going to be financially or socially or economically. And I can only say that the best place to be is in a place that you believe is good mental health. Because from there on, you can fix your financial health, you can fix your social health, you can fix your physical health. Because everything starts at the brain. And if the brain is all cloudy and miserable and is lacking serotonin or norepinephrine or dopamine, right? It's hard to get those things back. But if you do have them there, then it's easier to make decisions. There's been a lot of research done saying that people with poor mental health have bad financial health, have bad physical health, have bad social health, because your thought processes get confused, they get clouded. And it's really important to know that all of these things are intertwined. I'm here to teach you how to stay healthy, stay mentally healthy, but I cannot touch on how to stay financially healthy, you know, or socially healthy or any of those things. It's one step up a staircase. And once you start climbing up that staircase, things will start to become easier, because place by place by place by place, everything will sort of fit into this puzzle that is you as a person.
Another question here, thanks for that. Any tips on how to check up on your guy friends? It sometimes feels weird just to ask, hey, just thought about you.
I actually get this question quite a lot. If you are in a relationship with your friends that you could just say, hey, thinking about you, what you up to? Props to you. I know a lot of us aren't there, but I think even hey, I was gonna watch this movie. Do you wanna join me? Hey, I was gonna grab dinner. Do you wanna join me? Haven't seen you in a while. How was X? you know, by you starting off the conversation, it takes the pressure off of them and they seem more willing to both listen and engage to the conversation at hand. So, you know, not everyone's going to go around and just have really intense friendships all the time where it's okay to just be like, thinking about you, you okay? But I think it is important that you find a way that you can effectively communicate to your friends, right? If you've been friends with someone for a while, you know that they like basketball, they like rugby, they like cars, they like video games. Try to incorporate that into whatever you're saying, you know, give them an offer. And it's much easier for someone to accept an offer of interest of them than it is just to say, hey, thinking about you, how are you, you know? Because once the offer's on the table, once that person knows that they're safe with you, I think a genuine conversation can start up.
Interesting feedback. Thanks. There's another question here in that code. How can we deal with others while we have poor mental health ourselves so that we don't negatively harm someone else's mental health?
Yeah, this is a big question, right? A lot of us can find ourselves in spaces where we aren't mentally healthy, you know? We're the friend that might be exhibiting some sort of toxic behavior. We're the friend that just flakes all the time. We're the friend with a lot of anxiety. We're the friend who can't get out of bed. And it's hard. But to your friends, I suggest this. Be honest. Hi, I have not been feeling great in a while. I don't really want to discuss it right now, but thank you for being my friend. When I feel better, I would love to X and X. It's not necessarily an apology, but it is communication, you know, so the other person doesn't feel like they're being left off and you feel like you have this sense of power in this body that you can do these things once you feel better. It's never going to be like, I'm going to risk everything for one person, right? You have to take care of yourself first. Just like in the airplane, you put your gas mask on and you put the other person's mask on. It has to be like that. You have to take care of yourself first in order to help other people.
So thank God we don't have gas masks in New Zealand, so it's okay. The next question, which
oxygen mask, my bad.
Kill us with gas.
I think that Trump might have said gas masks in his latest thing, so it's just been stuck in my head.
How do you know where to draw the line between trying to help your friend in bad habits versus cutting them off because they are a bad influence on you?
Yeah, that one's tough because it does take a lot of introspection, you know? Sometimes like people don't do things that are malicious on purpose. They don't do things like that to hurt you, but things that they do hurt you. And it's important to be like, I'm going to keep saying this, but just have conversations. And if the conversations do not, you know, suffice, like if one person feels very guarded and is attacking another person, I think the best course of interest would just be honest and say, I am your friend, but I can't deal with myself right now. And I think that takes priority if I step away from this for a little while. I want to help you and I will help you in whatever ways that I can help you, but I just have to make space for myself first. It is definitely okay to be selfish in these scenarios. We all love our friends, we all love our families, but sometimes it gets too much to be around them all the time, to only have one point of view constantly. And by distancing yourself from them, you're giving yourself time to heal. And then after that healing, you might find that the other person has healed and you can have an honest conversation about these things. But if there's no conversation being had, if it's only angry arguments or passive aggressive comments, you know, you're not really going to get anywhere, and it's only going to make things explode faster.
So, Camille, there's a few other questions, but I think we'll hold them back because they're really controversial. And then you finish the last 3 slides you have, and then we'll come to those in there.
All right. Oh, so I'm going to go back to this one real quick. I just gave it a little skip, but I wanted to talk about self-harm in university settings, because I think the way that a lot of people might understand self-harm is, you know, people who physically harm themselves with like razors or knives, you know, punching, bruising, things like that. And yes, that is a form of self-harm. But have you ever had time to consider that maybe multiple sleepless nights of trying to get an assignment done is a form of self-harm? Because you're not getting the sleep that you need. You know, binge drinking and using drugs to try to cope from a bad test answer or going out to party is also a form of self-harm, because it harms your insides. Consistent poor eating habits, like not eating all day or only eating, you know, junk food all day, or going to the gym and only drinking like 500 calories of something a day. Those are all forms of self-harm that is not talked about, but are very prevalent in our college and university systems. And putting school or work before your mental health can only make your mental health worse. You have to be willing to take a look at yourself, an honest look at yourself, and say, what can I do to help myself? Not what can I do to fix this, right? Mental health is not a problem that can just be fixed. It's what can I do to help? What can I do to grow? What can I do to make myself feel better mentally and physically? So I just want to present that, you know, because a lot of people don't consider like staying up 3 nights in a row, chugging Red Bulls and going to class for finals. Like that's now seen as like typical college behavior, but it's not, you know. Not eating and not sleeping is not good for your brain. It's not good for your body. Your body starts to shut down. Binge drinking nights, doing drugs, like it's not great. I'm not here to tell you what to do, first of all, but it's just not great on your mental health. And doing things in moderation, totally fine. But doing things in an attempt to make one aspect of your life better by sacrificing another aspect of your life is considered self-harm, because you're harming one part of your life. And as we've seen in American studies, these themes are more and more common every year, whether it's, I didn't sleep for 3 nights so I could get my project done, or all I've eaten today are 8 cups of coffee, or I stayed in my bedroom for 3 days this weekend so that I could type up my typing. I don't know. It's all a form of self-harm because you are harming yourself in some way. And I think hearing this for me for the first time was really eye-opening, because I never considered any of those things self-harm. I just considered them bad coping strategies in one way. But the more I think about it, the more I was willing to do self-harm to get one thing done. Doesn't make sense for me, right? Because if you're just making one part of your health worse to benefit another part of your health, you're not staying healthy. It's still poor mental health, poor physical health. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. So yeah, some of the coping strategies that are not self-harm that I do want to leave you with, that I think a lot of people leave people with, is staying active. Maybe not by yourself, maybe with a friend, maybe with a family member, maybe with a pet. Read a book, just take a little look in a book. I find something that really helps me personally when I'm feeling anxious is to take a really cold shower. Make it as cold as possible, stand in there, and hope for the best. Staying connected to your friends and family is also really important. Having a plan of action with your friends and family is also very important. And when I say plan of action, I mean, hey, if I ever reach out to you in this way, do you think you can talk to me for a few minutes? I'm going through a crisis. Another thing I think we all just kind of forget to do in general is to take deep breaths. It's very important. It really helps your CNS system. And we're always just so on the go all the time that taking a moment for yourself and just breathing is actually quite helpful. I also put eat a nourishing meal. I don't know what that means to you. If that means like a hamburger and french fries, that's your nourishing meal. If it means a salad and a smoothie and that's what you eat, that's a nourishing meal. But in terms of like imposter syndrome and things like that, the two things that I want to leave you with are teach others and learn something new, right? Because the idea of imposter syndrome, it really messes with your mind. It makes you think things that aren't true. But if you know these things are true, like if you know you're a baller at math, teach someone about it, tutor them about it. If someone else is really excited about a paper they just wrote, read it. It won't take that much time, I promise, but it will help you feel better in that moment, right? Because there is a sense of satisfaction to doing those types of things that you feel might help you in the long run, help you in your career. Does anyone have any final out loud questions?
A few questions. Anybody questions on the floor?
I've got one. So just, I'll look at the camera. So one of the coping strategies that I've found really helpful for myself is meditation. I'd just be interested to hear your thoughts on meditation and whether you think it's something relevant that might be useful to discuss here.
Yeah, no, I think meditation and mindfulness are two things that I think are really important. I try not to use the word mindfulness as much in this presentation because in America, people associate mindfulness with like, you know, hippies and all of these very creative people. But mindfulness is really important because it gives you time to reflect on your day. And meditation is also really important because it gives you time to break away from everything else. I think having a meditation practice is really helpful because it allows you to not only look inside yourself, but to clear yourself from the errors of yesterday and the problems that you're facing. A lot of people do meditation in the morning, and it's a great way to start your day because you don't hop out of bed and are stressed and need to get somewhere. You're taking those, whether it be 5-10 minutes, to be with yourself and understand yourself and ground yourself to the day before moving on.
There's a question on Slido, and it's been upvoted vigorously in the last few minutes. Do you have any tips to identify toxic romantic relationships and how to deal with them? And they're asking that on behalf of their friends, not themselves.
I can give you a few tips. I think it's important in relationships for things to be equal. I'm not saying everything is equal. I'm just saying there has to be that sense of equality there for a relationship to even really blossom. Now, when we're talking about toxic relationships and toxic friendships, I think one of the main things is identifying and seeing if you can identify any red flags. However, with this comes a caveat because most people in a relationship disregard red flags altogether. So you might want to get someone else's perspective. And as angry as you might be at their perspective, it'll give you something to think about, right? As long as someone's not physically, verbally, or emotionally abusing you, in which those situations, I suggest finding someone that you can call that can help get you out of that situation. If it's just a toxic relationship, try to pros cons list it. What are the pros of staying in this relationship and what are the cons? You don't know how many times I personally have done a pros cons list for about everything. It really helps me get my train of thoughts on paper and have like concrete examples of each pro and each con.
Well, is there any other questions from the floor before we close it off with a vigorous one that has been really aggressively voted up? Annette.
Camille, thanks so much for all your explanations. I want to come back to the ABC model because you talked about an activating event. Sometimes the activating event is in the past. So when we talk about core wounds, for example, something that has happened and we are not even conscious about. So what are your suggestions to become aware of this and how can I deal with that? Because that might affect my beliefs and my mental health a lot.
Right. So one of the things that I want to speak about actually is past traumas can impact a lot of the ways in which we behave and the ways in which we emote. But with those past traumas, one of our most salient defense mechanisms is actually repression. So unless you have a good understanding of what the trauma is, the first step might just be figuring out what is wrong. And when I say what is wrong, I'm not necessarily saying what is the trauma, but in this moment in time, I feel activated, I feel triggered. What is the thing that I am being triggered by? And I think that will help a lot because things in the past that have activated you now build and build and build and build because it's so ingrained into you. You have to take a moment to sort of, I just want to say, like, put it into different boxes, you know. This is what upset me today, but it reminded me of this time when I was younger. And I wonder how the two are related. And for this type of reflection, I would absolutely invest in a journal. I know they seem silly or dumb sometimes, but just by having like an actual physical log of your trains of thoughts and going over them and seeing them, I think you might be able to not only identify where the problems are, but also see how you've been improving or how you've been regressing, what you want to do to help yourself become more mentally healthy, what you can do to sort of distance yourself from your triggers, from your stressors, from your traumas. I think that's really important.
Well, is there any other questions from the floor? There being none, let me just have the concluding question and we'll complete with this. This has been voted by a whole heap of people up. What's the difference between smashing a box of beers with the boys for fun and self-harm? And nobody here has done that, which is a good news. But we just wanted to know what your views are on that. Smashing a box of beers with the boys for fun and self-harm.
Can you repeat? So like you're throwing beers?
It's a very New Zealand question. I think Matt can ask that in a much more colloquial.
So yeah, smash means drink. So like drink a box of beers, binge drink a box of beers with the boys versus self-harm in the way you talked about earlier.
Yeah, if you're throwing boxes of beers, you know, it might be a little bit self-harm, but I'm not saying, you know, don't go out, don't have a like a nice night out with friends, you know, to decompress and stuff like that. I'm saying if because of adverse events, you find yourself drinking and drinking and drinking, that can be a form of self-harm, right? Like you come home, you do your homework, you drink a bottle of wine, you go to bed, you wake up the next day hungover. The only thing that can really fix your hungover is hair of the dog, go to school, feel sad again, drink more. It becomes this cycle, and then it becomes this sort of like dependence, almost addiction. And that's where the self-harm aspect kicks in. I have no qualms you slamming beers with the boys, I think. I'm not sure. I think that's a fun social activity, you know, be able to do that. That fosters community. But when it becomes a problem for your everyday life, that's definitely a form of self-harm.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Camille. We've all taken, well, I've certainly taken some amazing insights from this presentation, and I hope everyone else has as well. So thank you so much for staying up so late local time to give us these pearls of wisdom. We all really appreciate it. So just give a round of applause for you.